There is a photograph on my phone that I did not take. My neighbor Ruth sent it to me at 2:14 on a Tuesday afternoon. It shows the front door of my own house, and hanging on the knob of that door over the brass handle my husband installed 41 years ago is a realtor's lockbox. When that picture arrived, I was standing in the lobby of a place called Brookfield Commons, holding a welcome folder and a cup of weak coffee. My son Glenn was beside me, asking the director about meal plans. The room they wanted to show me cost $9,200 a month. And while I stood there nodding politely, my house went live on the internet for $835,000. Charming move in ready home, the listing said. Motivated seller. I am the seller, by the way. Nobody had asked me. My name is Harriet, and I am 74 years old. And that afternoon, my son believed he was 3 signatures away from selling my home out from under me. But here is the thing Glenn forgot about his mother. For 28 years, I was the woman at the closing table. I spent my whole career at a title company, reading deeds, catching liens, stopping bad sales before the ink touched the paper. My son was trying to run a real estate transaction past the one person in the family who did that for a living. 19 days after that lockbox went on my door, a full price cash offer landed on his listing. $835,000, no contingencies, 10-day close. Glenn celebrated with champagne. He told everyone it was done, and then, in a small signing room with bad carpet and good coffee, he read the name on that offer. He asked the escrow officer to read it twice. I will tell you what that name was, but first I have to take you back to the beginning because the lockbox was not the beginning. Before I do, let me ask you something. If you are listening to this, tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. And if anyone in your family has ever decided what was too much for you without asking you first, I would like to hear about that too. If this story sounds like a road you have walked, press the like button and subscribe, because I tell one of these every week, and the people who gather here understand things our own families sometimes do not. All right, come back 3 years with me. My house sits at 214 Alder Court, in a neighborhood where the maples are older than the mortgages. Walter and I bought it in 1985 for $62,000, which felt like all the money in the world. He was a building inspector. I was an escrow officer at Cedar County Title. Between the two of us, we knew every way a house can break your heart, and we bought this one anyway. Walter died 3 years ago this October. Congestive heart failure, which is a slow way to lose a man. I nursed him in this house for 2 years. I learned to manage his oxygen tank around the furniture. I moved our bed downstairs into the den so he could see the backyard because he liked watching the finches at the feeder. When he died, I moved the bed back upstairs by myself, one piece at a time, because I could not stand to ask anyone for help with it. People say a house is just a building. Those people have never washed their husband's hair in a kitchen sink because the shower upstairs got too far away. I know every noise this house makes. I know the third stair size. I know the kitchen window sticks in July. This house and I have an understanding. Now, about my family. I have one son, Glenn, who is 47. He sells commercial insurance and he is good at it, and I want to say plainly that Glenn was not always the man this story will show you. He was a boy who cried when we buried the dog. He was a teenager who mowed Mrs. Pell's lawn for free the whole summer she had cancer. Somewhere in there is still the person I raised. Glenn married Tiffany 11 years ago. Tiffany has a real estate license she got during the pandemic and a way of walking into my house that always felt less like visiting and more like appraising. They have 2 children, Katie, who is 19 and away at state college, and Cody, who is 15 and speaks mostly in nods. Katie matters to this story. Remember Katie. And there is one more person to introduce, though at the time I did not know how much he would matter. Dale Whitcomb, an estate attorney one town over, who played cards with Walter every other Thursday for 30 years. At Walter's funeral, Dale shook my hand longer than anyone else. He said something strange to me that day, standing by the casket spray. He said, "Harriet, when the time comes, you remember the envelope." I was too deep in grief to ask what he meant, but I want you to hold on to that sentence the same way I held on to it, the envelope. We will get there. After Walter passed, I did what widows are told to do. I got organized. And this is where I made the mistake that this whole story grows out of. About 6 months after the funeral, I had a health scare. Nothing dramatic in the end, a gallbladder that needed to come out, but it meant surgery, and surgery at 71 makes everyone around you start speaking in careful voices. Glenn drove me to the hospital. He was wonderful that week, I want to say that. He slept in the recliner in my room the first night, and while I was recovering, he suggested, gently and reasonably, that I sign a power of attorney. Just in case, Mom. So someone can pay the electric bill if you are ever laid up. That is what a power of attorney is for, and it was not a crazy idea, and I was tired and sore and grateful. I signed it in my hospital room with a notary Tiffany found. I remember Tiffany standing by the window while I signed, looking out at the parking lot. I remember thinking she seemed impatient and telling myself I was being unkind. Write this down somewhere, if you are a mother listening to me. The paper you signed to make things easier for your children is the same paper that makes things easier for your children. Every meaning of that sentence is true. For a couple of years, nothing happened. That is the truthful, boring middle of it. We had Sunday dinners. I watched Cody's baseball games from a folding chair. I taught Katie to make Walter's chili the fall before she left for college, and she wrote the recipe on an index card and taped it inside her suitcase. I cried a little after she went home that weekend. I kept living my life. And here I should tell you about my habit because it turns out to matter. 28 years in escrow teaches you one lesson above all the others. Write it down. The file is the truth. Memories argue, but the file just sits there being right. So I keep what Walter used to tease me about, a green steno pad in the kitchen drawer by the phone. Have for decades. Dates, amounts, who said what. When the furnace man came, when the property tax bill arrived, what Glenn borrowed, and when he paid it back. It is not suspicion. It is just how my mind files the world. That green pad will show up again in this story, in a room full of people who badly wished it did not exist. Now let me tell you what I gave before I tell you what they tried to take. I do not say this to make myself a saint. I say it because you need the ledger to understand the theft. In 2019, Glenn and Tiffany got underwater on credit cards, $61,000 all told. Glenn sat at my kitchen table with his face in his hands, and I went upstairs, and I came down with a check. Walter was still alive then, and we agreed, because you help your child when he is drowning. We never asked for it back. It never came back, for the record. But we never asked. When Katie's first year of college came up short, I covered the gap. $11,000 out of the savings Walter left me. I paid for half of Tiffany's mother's headstone, if you can believe that, because Glenn asked, and I did not want to fight inside their marriage to be my fault. 2 Thanksgivings, 1 roof repair on their house, a transmission for Glenn's truck the year his commissions fell through. I am not complaining. Hear me clearly. None of that is why I fought them later. I would give it all again. I am telling you because when a family decides an old woman is a burden, it helps to know she spent a decade being the safety net. The first sign that the wind had changed was small. They always are. It was Thanksgiving, a year and a half ago, and I came out of the kitchen with the gravy boat and found Tiffany standing in my dining room doorway with her phone held up, moving it slowly along the wall. There is an app that measures rooms. That is what she was doing, measuring my dining room during Thanksgiving dinner. She laughed when she saw my face and said she was just curious what the square footage really was, because county records are always off. I said the county records on this house are exactly right. She smiled and put the phone away. I went back for the cranberry sauce and I wrote it in the green pad that night. November 23rd. Tiffany measured the dining room. Reading that line back now gives me a chill. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. You always tell yourself it is nothing because the alternative is admitting that someone at your table is doing math on your life. The second sign had a sound to it. The sound was Glenn's voice on the phone a few months later, using a tone I had never heard from him. Bright and managed, like a man reading from a script taped next to the phone. He asked how the stairs were treating me. The stairs. I had sprained my wrist that winter, and I want to be precise about how, because of what they did with it later. I slipped on ice by the mailbox out at the curb, flat ground. Every neighborhood in America had somebody slip on the ice that week. But by the time that story had passed through Glenn and Tiffany and come back around to me at a family barbecue, my cousin Elaine was patting my arm and saying she heard I took a bad fall down the stairs. Down the stairs. I stood there with a paper plate of potato salad and understood in one cold drop that a story about me was being written by other people. And it was a story where I fall. If you have lived this, you know the feeling. Nothing has happened yet that you could take to a judge or even to an argument. A measured room, a misremembered fall, a son who asks about stairs the way a salesman asks about your current coverage. But your stomach knows. My stomach knew that summer. And this is when I did the thing that saved me, though I did not know it yet. I remembered the casket spray and Dale Whitcomb's hand holding mine a beat too long. Harriet, when the time comes, you remember the envelope. I had never asked. 3 years, and I had never once asked, because asking felt like opening Walter's coffin back up. There is a cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Walter's mother's chest, older than both of us, quilts on top, and under the quilts, the things a marriage keeps. His service medal, the hospital bracelet from the day Glenn was born, and a manila envelope I had seen 100 times and never opened, because it had Dale's name written across it in Walter's blocky inspector handwriting. Just below the name, one line. Not yet. You can call me foolish for leaving it be, but if your husband left you a message in his own hand, you might also find that there is a kind of company in not yet. As long as it stayed sealed, Walter still had one more thing to say to me. That July, after the barbecue, after the stairs I never fell down, I sat on my bed with the chest open and that envelope in my lap for a long hour. Then I put it in my purse. I made an appointment with Dale Whitcomb for a Tuesday morning. What was in that envelope is the hinge this whole story swings on. But I am not going to open it for you yet, because I want you to feel what that summer and fall felt like from inside my kitchen. It felt like weather coming. So keep your eye on my purse. The envelope stays in it a little while longer. The pressure started in earnest that September. It came dressed as concern, the way it always does. Concern is the Trojan horse they wheel up to an old woman's door. The first scene I can date exactly because of the green pad. September 9th. A woman named Sandra Voss dropped by while Glenn and Tiffany were visiting. Dropped by. Sandra is a realtor, and she is Tiffany's friend from her gym, a tall woman with a laugh that starts before anything funny has been said. She just happened to be in the neighborhood. She just happened to have a folder with her. And when they left that evening, the folder just happened to be on my kitchen counter. Comparative market analysis, it said on the cover. 214 Alder Court. Inside were photographs of my neighbors' houses and the prices they had sold for, with a range circled in yellow highlighter at the bottom. $810,000 to $860,000. Somebody had written one word next to the circle, in handwriting I recognized from 11 years of birthday cards. Tiffany's handwriting. The word was conservatively. I stood in my kitchen holding a sales pitch for my own home that nobody had bothered to hide from me. That was the part that scared me, if I am honest with you, not the folder, the carelessness. You leave the folder on the counter when you have stopped worrying what the old woman thinks. I did not throw it away. Escrow officers do not throw away documents. I wrote the date on a sticky note, stuck it to the cover, and filed it in the bottom drawer of Walter's desk. Exhibit 1, though I did not use those words yet, even to myself. The second scene was a Sunday dinner at their house in October. I knew something was planned because Tiffany used cloth napkins and because Cody had clearly been told to stay at the table. Between the roast and the store-bought pie, Glenn cleared his throat the way he used to before piano recitals. Mom, we want to talk about the house. He had bullet points. I could see the phone propped against his water glass with notes on it. The house was too much for me, he said. The stairs, he said, and I watched Tiffany nod at the word stairs like it was a scripture reading. The yard, the gutters, the property taxes, the furnace that was 12 years old. He said the phrase equity doing nothing, and I remember exactly because it is such a strange phrase. Equity doing nothing. My equity, apparently, was supposed to have a job. And then Tiffany slid a glossy folder across the table to me, and the folder said Brookfield Commons on it, in a font that was trying very hard to look like handwriting. Independent living with a continuum of care, it said. Chef-prepared meals, a salon, a pond. They had already toured it, Tiffany said, and it was gorgeous. They had already spoken to the director about availability. There is a wait list, Glenn said, but they take a refundable deposit to hold a place, and we put one down. We put one down. Past tense. $4,000 I found out later, and I will let you guess whose bank account it came from. Guess, and then hold that thought, because that little detail comes back at the worst possible moment for my son. I looked at the pond on the brochure. I looked at my son, who would not quite look at me. And I asked one question in the flat, calm voice I used for 28 years when a document had a problem in it. Whose name is the deposit receipt in? Glenn blinked. Tiffany answered for him. Yours, of course, Harriet. It is your future. Of course, I said I would think about it, which is a sentence that cost nothing. I helped clear the dishes, I complimented the pie, and in the car, in the driveway, before I turned the key, I sat and let my hands shake for exactly 1 minute. Then I drove home to the house I had lived in for 41 years, and I walked in, and the third stair sighed, and I stood in the dark hallway and I said out loud, to nobody, we are not going anywhere. If you are wondering why I did not just tell them no, flat out, right there over the pie, I want to explain something about being 74. When you are 74, anger is evidence. If a man of 40 says absolutely not, he is firm. If a woman of 74 says it, she is agitated, she is confused, she is getting difficult, and the difficulty becomes one more exhibit in the case for the home. I knew the game the way a referee knows a sport she used to play. So I did not give them my anger. I gave them, I will think about it, and I started keeping better files. October gave me 2 more scenes for the pad. The first one still makes my jaw tighten. I was at my bank, the First Federal Branch on Corliss Avenue, where I have banked for 30 years and where the tellers know my name. A teller named Denise, who I once brought zucchini bread when her son was deployed, leaned in while she counted my withdrawal. She said, "Mrs. Calloway, did your son find everything he needed last week?" I kept my face pleasant. 28 years of closings taught me a pleasant face while my mind runs a title search. I said, "I am sure he did, and what day was that again?" "Tuesday," she said. "He had the power of attorney paperwork, and he was asking about the certificates of deposit when they mature, what the penalties were for early withdrawal. The penalties for early withdrawal. On my certificates." I thanked Denise. I complimented her haircut. I walked out to my car at a completely normal speed, and then I sat behind the wheel and I wrote every word of it in the green pad with a hand that was not completely steady. October 14th. Glenn at First Federal with POA asked about my CD's early withdrawal penalties. Do you understand what that meant? A power of attorney is a tool for paying the electric bill when your mother is laid up. It is not a periscope for looking into her retirement while she is perfectly well and driving herself to the bank. He was not managing my affairs. He was inventorying them. The second October scene I owe to Katie. I told you to remember Katie. She called me from her dorm on a Thursday night, and her voice had that too casual sound young people get when they are carrying something heavy and pretending it is a joke. "Grandma," she said, "are you moving?" I said, "That is certainly a question. Why do you ask it?" "Because at fall break," she said, "Mom and Dad had people over, and Sandra was there, and I came down for a soda and they had a laptop open at the kitchen table. And Grandma, it had pictures of your house on it. Not old pictures, new ones. The living room with different pillows on your couch." She said Sandra used a word she did not like. Sandra had looked at the screen and said the place had great bones but showed like a grandma house, and everyone laughed, and Tiffany said something about how staging would fix most of it. And then Katie said the sentence I will hear until the day I die. "Grandma," Dad said, "by spring she will come around, and if she does not, the doctor visit takes care of it. The doctor visit takes care of it." 15 words from my son's mouth, reported to me by his own daughter, who was crying by the end of the call and asking me not to tell anyone she told. I promised her two things that night: that I would never tell where I heard it, and that nobody was taking the house where she learned to make her grandfather's chili. I have kept both promises. That is what the doctor visit meant, in case you have not walked this road. There are physicians, and I want to be careful because most are decent, but there are a few who will see a 74-year-old woman brought in by a worried son, and hear the phrase declining at home and write the word that unlocks everything: incapacity. With the right paperwork and the wrong doctor, an old woman does not have to agree to anything ever again. Her son signs for her son with his power of attorney and his concerned face. I did not sleep the night of Katie's call. I sat in Walter's chair in the den until the windows went gray, with the manila envelope on my knees. "Not yet," said Walter's handwriting. "Yes, now," said everything else in that room. Dale Whitcomb's office smells like paper and lemon drops. He keeps a bowl of them on the desk, has since Reagan was president. That Tuesday morning, he took one look at my face and closed his door. I put the envelope on his desk. I said, "Dale, it is the time you told me about, and I need you to tell me what my husband knew that I did not." Dale turned the envelope over in his hands, and he smiled at Walter's handwriting the way you smile at a friend's voice on an old answering machine. Then he told me a story I had never heard, about my own marriage. In the last year of his life, Walter watched a thing happen to his card friend, Earl Hodges. Earl's kids moved him into a facility and sold his split level before the ink on the doctor's letter was dry. Earl had built that house with his own hands, and he spent his last 2 years asking visitors to drive him past it. Walter came home from Earl's funeral, Dale said, and sat down in this same chair and said, "Dale, my boy is a good boy, but his wife has a calculator where her heart ought to be," and Harriet would hand them the shirt off her back and thank them for taking it. "Draw it up," Walter said. So Dale drew it up. Inside that envelope was a copy of a deed, recorded quietly in 2019, 4 years before Walter died. Our house, 214 Alder Court, transferred from Walter and Harriet Calloway into something called the Calloway Family Trust, and there was a trust document with it, thick as a paperback. I want to explain this simply because it is the part people ask about. When a house is owned by a trust, no individual person can sell it, not the widow's son, not the widow's son with a power of attorney, because the power of attorney only covers what the widow personally owns, and the widow personally did not own the house anymore. The trust owned it. And the trustee, the only living human being with authority over that house, was me. Successor trustee upon Walter's death, Harriet Calloway. I signed those trust papers myself is the strange part. In 2019, in a season when I was signing everything Dale put in front of us because Walter's heart had started failing and we were doing what he called tidying up. I remembered the afternoon, vaguely. I did not remember its meaning. Walter had understood it completely and had chosen, gently, not to make me carry it while he was alive. There was one more thing in the envelope, a letter, one page, Walter to me. I will not read you all of it because some things belong to a marriage even after the marriage has one member left. But I will give you 2 lines from it. Harriet, if you are reading this with Dale, then somebody has started circling, and I am sorry I am not there to stand in the doorway. You will not need me anyway because I did not marry a woman who loses at paperwork. I laughed and cried in the same breath in that lemon drop office, with Dale politely studying his diploma wall. Then I wiped my face, and the escrow officer in me sat up and asked Dale the professional question. What is our exposure? And here is where we found the one real problem. That power of attorney I signed in the hospital was broad. Dale read it and did not like it. It could not touch the house, but it could touch my accounts, my CDs, my car title, and worst of all, it could dress Glenn up as my agent in front of doctors and banks and judges. Combined with a cooperative physician, it was a key that could open me. So that morning, we did 3 pieces of work quietly, the way I like work done. We executed a revocation of that power of attorney, and Dale recorded it with the county and put copies in his safe. We wrote a new one naming Dale himself, with a provision requiring 2 independent physicians, chosen by Dale, before anyone could call me incapacitated. And we moved my accounts, the CDs Glenn had been pricing, every dollar into new accounts at a different bank, titled to the trust. By noon, my son's set of keys to my life had been melted down. He did not know it. And Dale asked me the question that decided the shape of this whole story. He said, Harriet, do you want me to call Glenn and tell him it is over before it starts? I looked at the lemon drops for a while, and I said no. I want to be honest with you about why, because it was not sweetness. If Dale made that call, Glenn would retreat, regroup, apologize, and wait. I would spend my remaining years watching the driveway. No. 28 years at the closing table taught me that you do not stop a fraud by warning the man committing it. You let him walk it all the way to the table, in front of witnesses, on the record. You let him sign things. Let them build the whole machine, I told Dale, and we will let it run over them. Dale unwrapped a lemon drop and said, Walter always claimed you were the dangerous one. It is the finest compliment I have received in my widowhood. Now I had to do the hardest work of my life. Nothing. All winter I had to be the woman they thought I was. A little vague, a little tired, coming around slowly. If you think that sounds easy, try smiling at Thanksgiving at people you have files on. Try passing your son the sweet potatoes while he tells his uncle, in the tone of a man being brave, that you are all looking at some options for mom. I dropped a stitch here and there on purpose. I let Tiffany explain my own microwave to me. I asked Glenn twice in one dinner what day the trash went out, and watched him trade a look with his wife, a look with a for sale sign buried in it. Forgive me, but I enjoyed some of it. There is a freedom on the far side of heartbreak where the acting gets easy. The heartbreak was real, though. I want to stop here and say that, because I am telling this story with a straight back, and it can sound like I felt nothing. Some nights that winter, I stood in Glenn's old bedroom, which is still half his, with his debate trophies boxed in the closet. I would hold some little object, a ribbon, a school photograph, and try to draw a line from that boy to the man pricing my certificates of deposit. You cannot draw the line. That is the grief of it. There is no day you can point to and say, here is where my child became someone who would do this. There is only the boy, and then the man, and a fog in between, where you apparently were not watching closely enough. Mothers, hear me. You were watching closely enough. Some people simply become what the person beside them keeps calling reasonable. In February, they tried the doctor. It was staged as a kindness. A checkup Glenn scheduled with a new physician, a friend of Tiffany's, because my regular doctor, and I quote, never really does the full workup. The full workup turned out to include a gentleman asking me to count backward from 100 by sevens while my son watched. 93, I said, 86, 79, 72. I did the whole staircase without stopping, and then I asked the doctor if he wanted compound interest as well. And then I did something I had been saving. I mentioned conversationally that my attorney had prepared a letter for exactly this sort of appointment, and I laid Dale's letter on his desk. The letter that explained who my designated agent was and what 2 independent evaluations would be required, and how thoroughly any physician participating in a competency determination arranged by a financially interested party would come to regret it. The doctor read it twice. Then he told Glenn with a bright and careful smile that his mother was sharp as a tack and he saw no concerns whatsoever. In the parking lot, Glenn was quiet in a new way, not defeated, recalculating. I know my son's face when a door closes on him. He stops looking at the door and starts looking for a window, and that is when I knew the house itself would be next, and soon. What I did not know was how fast and how crude they would be about it. I thought they would come at me with more paperwork first. Instead, they simply decided my consent was a decoration, something optional, like the pond at Brookfield Commons. March 11th is written in the green pad in ink I pressed too hard. That was the Tuesday of the tour. Glenn had asked me the week before, so warmly, if I would just come look at Brookfield with him. No pressure, Mom, just to see it, so you are making an informed decision. Informed decision. He used my own kind of language, and I said yes because by then I understood my role in their play, and I intended to perform it beautifully. He picked me up at 1 o'clock. I remember he had washed the truck like it was a date. And I remember Tiffany was not with us, which struck me as odd for about one more hour, until I understood exactly what Tiffany was doing that afternoon instead. Brookfield Commons smells like vanilla and hand sanitizer, in that order. The director, a perfectly nice woman named Ms. Arden, walked us past the salon and the library with the fireplace nobody was sitting near. She showed me a one-bedroom unit on the second floor. It was clean and small, and the window looked at the parking lot. And I stood in that unit while my son asked about meal plans and laundry service. And I did the math they thought I could no longer do. $9,200 a month, $110,000 a year. And I thought, in my flat escrow voice, well, that is a mortgage on a very nice house, paid to not live in mine. That is when my phone buzzed in my purse, against the manila envelope I had carried all winter like a talisman. The photograph. Ruth, from across the street, no message at first, just the picture, my front door, the lockbox, then 3 dots, and then, Harriet, there are people at your house and a sign going up. Are you all right? I want to describe the next 60 seconds carefully because I am proud of them. I did not gasp. I did not sit down. I looked at the picture of a lockbox on my dead husband's door handle, and I felt the floor of my life tilt, and I put the phone back in my purse and asked Miss Arden whether the second floor units got the morning or the afternoon sun. Afternoon, she said. I said that sounded lovely. And in the truck on the way home, while my son chattered with relief about how well I had taken the tour, I sat with my purse on my lap, and inside my head, with total calm, the closing officer took over the file. They had listed the house. While its owner toured a care home, they had listed the house. That is not a family disagreement anymore. That is a transaction. And transactions, my dears, are my country. Glenn did not drive me home. He suggested an early dinner, a diner 2 towns in the wrong direction, and I understood the assignment was to keep me away from Alder Court while the photographer finished and the sign got planted, so I ordered the meatloaf. I asked about Cody's baseball. I watched my son eat pie across from me, this boy I taught to hold a fork, while a stranger's lockbox hung on our door, and I honestly do not know which of us was performing better. He dropped me home after dark. The sign was in the yard, lit by his own headlights as he backed out. Coming soon, it said, above Sandra Voss's smiling photograph. He waved at me from the truck. He waved. He had watched me see the sign, and his plan for that moment was a wave and a quick reverse into the street, like a boy who rings a doorbell and runs. I stood in my yard in the dark, and Ruth came across the street in her house slippers and stood next to me without a word. Ruth is 81 and buried 2 husbands, and she knows when a moment does not need talking. After a while, she said, "Well," I said, "Well," and then she said, "What do you need?" And I said, "I need you to keep doing exactly what you did today." And I patted her hand, and I went inside and called Dale Whitcomb at his home number, which he had written on the back of his card in the Lemon Drop office. I said, "Dale, they listed it." There was a pause, and then Dale said a word I will not repeat, and then he apologized, and then he said the sentence I had been waiting all winter to hear. He said, "All right, Harriet, now we let the machine run over them." If you are still with me, this is where I ask you once more. If a lockbox on your own front door would have broken something in you, leave a comment, because I read them, and there are more of us than anyone admits. And stay close now, because the next part is the part I promised you at the beginning. Here is what my son had actually done on paper, because paper is where I live. He had signed a listing agreement with Sandra Voss as seller of 214 Alder Court, using the power of attorney, the revoked power of attorney, the one whose revocation had been sitting in the county record since November, indexed, stamped public, where any title person would find it in about 90 seconds. Sandra never checked. Tiffany, with her pandemic license, never checked. They pulled an old tax record, saw the Callaway name, and built a whole future on it. The listing went live at $835,000 while I was admiring the afternoon sun at Brookfield Commons, photographs of my living room with my furniture moved around and Walter's chair missing from its place by the window. That detail, I will confess, got through my armor. They had moved his chair to the garage for the photographs. It showed like a grandma house, you will recall. Dale wanted to kill the listing that first night with one phone call. He was ready to fax the trust deed and the revocation to Sandra's broker before breakfast and end it. I said no. Dale, I said, if you shoot it down tonight, what happens? Embarrassment. An apology written by a lawyer, and a family Christmas where everyone says we misunderstood each other. And next year they are back, more careful, and I am a year older. No, I have sat at 1,000 closings. Nobody learns anything at a listing. People learn at the table. So we prepared quietly, in the way that I want to teach every woman listening to this. First, evidence. Dale sent a records request and got the listing agreement. Glenn had signed it, attorney in fact for Harriet Calloway, with a flourish. He had initialed a seller disclosure stating the property was owner occupied by a relative transitioning to assisted living. Transitioning. I was transitioning the way a bank vault transitions when somebody drills it. Second, the money trail. Remember the $4,000 deposit at Brookfield Commons? It had been paid from my checking account, the old one, in October, using the power of attorney 12 days before my revocation was recorded, which meant that one at least was arguably legal at the time, and here's the part that still makes me smile. Dale called Brookfield, very politely, and confirmed the deposit was refundable, and had Ms. Arden note on the account that any refund could only be issued to me personally. $4,000 of their war chest, frozen in vanilla-scented amber. Third, and this was my idea, we made sure the listing succeeded. You heard me right. An overpriced listing that sits for months gets withdrawn, and withdrawn listings teach nobody anything. I wanted a buyer. I wanted a fast, clean, thrilling, full-price cash buyer, the kind that makes a seller lose his mind and start spending money he does not have. And I knew exactly where to find one. The Calloway Family Trust had been sitting on Walter's life insurance and our savings for 3 years, conservative as a church picnic. The trust, Dale confirmed, could buy real estate, any real estate. For instance, a charming move and ready home at 214 Alder Court. Do you see it now? My house could not be sold because the seller did not own it, but the listing did not know that yet. So the trust, my trust, made an offer on my own house, through Dale's office, under its formal name, with a bank letter showing cash funds. The offer said the buyer was the W&H Calloway Family Trust, care of Whitcomb Law. And if you are thinking, surely Glenn would read the name Calloway on the offer and understand, well, hold that thought. Because what happened instead tells you everything about what greed does to a man's eyesight. But first, the open house. I need to tell you about the open house because it was the worst afternoon of this whole affair, and I do not want you thinking my winter was all chess moves and quiet satisfaction. They held it on a Saturday in late March. I knew because Tiffany called me that morning with a plan for my day so elaborate it had an itinerary. A doctor's appointment she had scheduled, then lunch with her and her sister, then an outlet mall I have never once expressed interest in. I let her herd me. It served the plan. But Ruth stayed home, and Ruth, God bless her to her socks, walked into my open house like any other neighbor and took a video on her phone the whole way through. I watched it that night at her kitchen table. Strangers in my front hall, a young couple opening my bedroom closet where my dresses hang, where Walter's one good suit still hangs, and the wife wrinkling her nose at something. Sandra Voss in the kitchen, my kitchen, telling a man in a golf shirt that the bones were fantastic and the seller was extremely motivated. There was a bowl of my lemon drops on the counter, set out like bait. I bought those lemon drops because of Dale's office, is the silly thing, and people I had never met were eating them in my kitchen while a realtor called me a motivated seller. Ruth turned off the phone and put her hand over mine. I did not cry, quite. I sat in her kitchen and I said, Walter is in the garage, Ruth. They put him in the garage. And that was the only minute of this entire war where I almost picked up the phone and just screamed at my son like a mother instead of proceeding like a trustee. Almost. Instead, I went home and I carried Walter's chair back in from the garage by myself, the way I once carried our bed upstairs. It is not heavy. Grief gives you arms. I set it back by the window at its angle, the Finch feeder angle, and I sat in it in the dark with my coat still on. And I made the decision I want to hand to every woman who has ever been called a motivated seller by people spending her money. I decided that pity, including my own for myself, was a luxury the file could not afford. Monday morning, the trust made its offer. Full asking price. $835,000, cash, as is, no inspection contingency, 10-day close, $5,000 earnest money, one condition only. Closing to be held at Cornerstone Title and Escrow, downtown. Cornerstone is not the biggest shop in the county. But the senior escrow officer at Cornerstone is a woman named Donna Petrelli, who I trained in 1996 and who reads a title chain the way I taught her to. This matters. I was not stacking the deck, understand. The deck stacks itself when the documents are honest. I just wanted the room to be run by someone who would not blink. The offer landed Monday at 4:40 in the afternoon. At 6:15, my phone rang, and it was Glenn, and his voice had gone up a full octave from the careful stare asking baritone of the past year. Mom. Mom, are you sitting down? The house sold. Full price, cash. They are not even doing an inspection. Sandra says she has never seen an offer this clean. Do you hear what I am telling you? This is a blessing. This is meant to be. Meant to be. I was sitting in Walter's chair when he said it. I looked at the Finch feeder and I said, my goodness, who is the buyer? There was a rustle of paper, and my son, my college graduate son, the insurance man who reads contracts for a living, said, it is some family trust. The lawyer represents them. Investors, probably. They have been buying up nice properties all over. Some family trust. He read the name Callaway at the top of my own trust's offer, and his eyes slid off it like rain off glass because Sandra had said the word cash, and cash is a bright light, and moths do not read. Tiffany got on the line. She was warm to me for the first time in a year, warm like a heat lamp, and she said, Harriet, sweetheart, isn't it wonderful? Everything is just falling into place. Sweetheart. The dining room measurer called me sweetheart. I said it certainly was falling, and that much was true. And that Friday, they took me to dinner to celebrate. And this is the dinner I mentioned an hour ago, the champagne dinner, and I want to walk you through it slowly because I have replayed it many times, and it improves with every viewing. They chose a steakhouse with cloth napkins, the kind of place Glenn picks when the bill is an investment. Sandra Voss came, which tells you what kind of family dinner it was. Glenn ordered champagne, actual champagne, and raised his glass and gave a toast about new chapters. To Mom's new chapter, he said, and everyone looked at me with tender eyes. And I raised my glass of ginger ale and said, to the closing. They loved that. Sandra laughed her early laugh and said she was going to steal that one. And then, glasses still in the air, my family began to spend my house in front of me. Tiffany had a folder. Of course she had a folder. The proceeds, she explained, would go into what she kept calling the family plan. Brookfield for me, the buy-in in about 2 years prepaid, a renovation of their kitchen, which she had the quote for, $92,000, and she showed me a picture of an island with a special faucet just for filling pasta pots. Private school for Cody. A rental duplex Sandra had a line on, because you have to make money work, Harriet. You taught Glenn that. I have never taught anyone that sentence. And then Glenn, 2 glasses in, leaned over and patted my hand and delivered the line that ended any flicker of doubt about what I was going to do at that table 9 days later. He said, Mom, be honest, you would have hung on to that place until you died in it, and then we would have had to deal with all of it anyway. This way is cleaner for everybody. There it is. That is the sentence under all of it, the one they never mean to say out loud, and the champagne carried it up like a bubble. The house was always coming to them, you see. I was just holding it too long. My death was an inconvenient schedule, and they had found a workaround. I looked at my son, and something final and quiet happened in me, painless, like a lock clicking. And I smiled and said, well, it sounds like everyone has thought of everything. Now I have to tell you about the 2 days I nearly lost the whole game, because I promised you the truth and not just the victory lap. Here's the thing about a real estate closing that the movies never show you. Before anyone signs anything, the title company issues what is called a preliminary report. And a preliminary report states, in black ink, on about page 4, exactly who owns the property, which meant that in the week after the offer was accepted, a document would land in Sandra Voss's inbox and in Tiffany's licensed little hands that said Callaway Family Trust right there in the vesting paragraph. If either of them read it, the trap died in the dark. No table, no witnesses, just a quiet withdrawal, a lawyered apology, and a more careful second attempt on me next year. Dale had warned me about this from the start. Harriet, he said, we cannot hide the vesting, and we will not. Everything we do stays legal to the last comma. If they read the prelim, they read it. The plan only works because you are betting they will not. I was betting my whole endgame on the same carelessness that left a market analysis folder on my kitchen counter. The prelim went out on a Wednesday at 4 o'clock. Donna confirmed it because it was public and proper to confirm. And then I had the 2 longest days of my widowhood. Thursday, nothing. Friday morning, Tiffany called me and my heart went up into my ears and she said, Harriet, quick question about the closing. I sat down on the 3rd stair. I said, of course, dear. And Tiffany, licensed real estate professional, asked me whether I thought they should get the buyers a gift, since the buyers were being so easy about everything. Something classy, she said, maybe wine. I looked at the ceiling of my front hall for a moment, and I said, wine is always right, and she said perfect, and hung up happy. She had the report. Katie told me afterward that it sat in the famous folder, under the kitchen quote with the pasta faucet, printed and never read, because Sandra had told them prelims were boilerplate and the deal was clean. Boilerplate. 28 years of my life, boilerplate. I have never been so grateful to be boring. That Friday night, I ate dinner standing up at the counter, which Walter used to say was the surest sign his wife was rattled. It is the only night of this entire story that I doubted myself. Not whether I was right, whether being right would matter, which is a different and colder question, and every woman my age knows the difference. Saturday came, and no phone call, and the machine rolled on toward the table. 1 week out, Dale asked me the last question, the one I had been chewing on since the lockbox. Harriet, he said, how public do you want the lesson? We could still do this in private, lawyers only, no witnesses beyond the family. Or we let the closing convene, everyone at the table, and the title work speaks for itself in front of every person who built this scheme. I thought about Earl Hodges, asking visitors to drive him past his own split level. I thought about my dresses hanging open to strangers, and the lemon drops set out as bait, and Walter's chair in the garage with a garden hose looped over the arm, which is a detail from Ruth's video I had not mentioned until now because I can hardly say it. And I thought about Katie, whose name I had promised to keep out of it, and how the only way to keep that promise forever was to make sure nobody ever needed her testimony. The documents would be the only witness required. Everyone at the table, I said. Closing day was a Thursday, the second week of April. Cornerstone title, Suite 240, the long room with the bad carpet and the good coffee that every title office in America somehow shares. I know that room. I have run 1,000 rooms like it. Donna Petrelli had the file, and Dale had briefed her attorney to attorney, so Cornerstone knew exactly what was in the title chain. No ambush of the innocent, that is malpractice. The only people in the dark were the people who had earned the dark. They scheduled it for 10 in the morning. Glenn wore his good suit, Tiffany wore real estate beige and brought the folder with the pasta faucet in it. Sandra brought a gift bag with a bottle of wine for the buyers, which she set on the table like a centerpiece. And at 10:02, the door opened and the buyer's side came in. Dale Whitcomb, in his gray cardigan, carrying his briefcase. And me, in my dusty rose cardigan and my pearl studs and Walter's watch on my wrist, with my purse over my arm and the green steno pad inside it. I wish you could have seen the 3 seconds where nobody's face worked. Glenn half stood, pure reflex, and said, Mom, you cannot. This is the closing. And I pulled out the chair across from my son, the buyer's chair, and I sat down in it, and I said the sentence I had been saving all winter. I know it is the closing, sweetheart. I am the buyer. Silence has textures. Courtroom silence is stiff. Church silence is soft. Title office silence, when a deal is dying and everyone smells it, is a vacuum, and we sat in it for a good 5 seconds. Sandra recovered first because commissions make people brave. She laughed the early laugh and said, Harriet, I think there is some confusion. The buyer is an investment trust. I said, yes. The W&H Callaway Family Trust. W for Walter. H for Harriet. You will find my name on the offer you have had for 10 days, right at the top, and I watched all 3 of them look down at their own paperwork and actually read it for the first time. Tiffany's face did something I had never seen it do. It stopped selling, Glenn said quietly, like a boy. Mom, what is this? And I looked at Donna Petrelli and said the words I used to say every working day of my life. Donna, I believe we are ready to review title. Donna cleared her throat and did her job. And her job, done plainly, in order, out loud, was an execution. Item 1. Title search shows the property at 214 Alder Court vested in the Callaway Family Trust, by deed recorded June of 2019. The named seller, Harriet Callaway individually, holds no individual interest in the property, and the listing party therefore had no authority to offer it for sale. Item 2. The listing agreement was executed by Glenn Callaway as attorney in fact, under a power of attorney dated 3 years prior. The county index shows a revocation of that power of attorney recorded in November. The instrument Mr. Callaway signed with was void months before he signed it. Item 3. The seller disclosure, initialed G.C., describes the occupant as a relative transitioning to assisted living. The occupant is present, said Donna, and did not look up, which is exactly how I trained her, and appears to be purchasing the property. Somewhere in item 2, Sandra Voss began to slide her chair back from the table, very slowly, the way you back away from a stove fire. Her broker was on the phone within the hour, I later learned, and her gift bag stayed on the table when she left. We still have the wine. Glenn sat with his hands flat on the table, staring at the deed copy Donna slid across, at the signatures, his father's and mine, and the date, 2019. And I watched him do the math and arrive at the terrible sum. His father had seen him coming 4 years before he came. He looked up at me, and his voice cracked on one word: Dad? And that was the moment, I will tell you honestly, that my heart went ahead and broke all the way, right there in a title office, in my good cardigan, at the winning table. Because he was not asking about the deed. He was asking whether his father had died thinking of him as a threat. And the answer was yes. The answer was an envelope that said not yet, in a cedar chest, for 4 years. And then I did the thing I had been carrying in my purse all winter, the last instruction in Walter's letter. The one line of it I will read you now because it stopped being only mine that morning. The letter to me ended, and below his signature there was a postscript. It said, Harriet, in the envelope behind this one, there is a smaller one with our boy's name on it. Do not soften it by mailing it. If this day ever comes, you put it in his hand yourself, at whatever table it comes to, because a man should get his reckoning and his father's love in the same envelope. So I opened my purse, there in the signing room, and I took out a small white envelope, soft at the corners, from 4 years in a cedar chest and one winter in a purse, with one word on it in blocky inspector handwriting: Glenn. I slid it across the table, past the gift bag, and I watched my son recognize the handwriting from 6 feet away, the way you recognize a voice through a door. He put both hands flat on either side of it and did not touch it. He did not open it at the table. I am glad he did not, and I think his father would be too. He carried it out of that office unopened, like something that weighed more than paper. I know now where he opened it, and you will too in a minute. Tiffany did not have such a moment. Tiffany went to war. She stood up and called it elder abuse, of all the phrases available, me abusing them by owning my own house. She said the word lawyer 4 times. She said I had humiliated the family, that I had let them plan and dream and spend, knowing. And on that one point, I answered her. I said, yes, I let you do every single thing you were always going to do. The only thing I took away was the part where it worked. Then Dale opened his briefcase and laid out the aftermath, item by item, in his pleasant Thursday card game voice. The trust offer was withdrawn, effective immediately, buyer and seller being, as he put it, insufficiently distinct. A complaint regarding the listing had been prepared for the State Real Estate Commission, naming both Sandra Voss and, as a licensee participating in the marketing, Tiffany. A report of attempted unauthorized conveyance had been drafted, though not yet filed, addressed to the district attorney's Elder Financial Exploitation Unit. Whether it ever gets filed, Dale said, folding his hands, will depend on the next several months of everyone's behavior. That is Dale's version of mercy. A loaded document, safety on the table where everyone can see it. I added only 2 conditions of my own. Every key to my house returned that afternoon. And the $4,000 deposit at Brookfield Commons, which had been paid with my money, refunded to me, by them walking into that vanilla lobby and asking for it back themselves. I hear the director was very gracious about it. I do think about that walk of theirs sometimes, past the salon, past the pond. It is small of me. I have made peace with being a little small twice a year as a treat. The meeting broke up the way a funeral does, in awkward clumps. Glenn stopped in the doorway, last one out, and turned around and said, Mom, I need you to believe it started as worry. It really did start as worry. And here's the thing, I do believe that. I believe worry was the seed. But Tiffany watered it, and Sandra fertilized it, and the equity did the sunshine, and what grew was a plan where my consent was a weed. I told him something close to that, gentler, and I told him one thing more, which I had decided in Walter's chair and rehearsed so I would not cry. I said, Glenn, you are my son, and I love you the length of my life. But you waved at me. You put a lockbox on your father's door, and you backed out of my driveway, and you waved. I can forgive you the paperwork someday. I am still working on the wave. He did not have an answer. There is not one. That was April. Let me tell you about since, because I promised you at the start that this story ends with dignity and not just with a one table. The sign came out of my yard the next morning. Sandra's junior agent did it at 7:40, fast like a man retrieving something from a lion's cage. Ruth watched from her porch with her coffee and gave him a little wave. She says he flinched. The lockbox took 2 more days, and when it came off, I did something that surprised me. I had the locks changed anyway, all of them, good heavy brass, and I paid the locksmith extra to leave me the old front door handle set in a paper bag. Walter installed that handle in 1985. It lives in the cedar chest now, next to a manila envelope and a hospital bracelet. The chest is getting full of things that held. 2 weeks after the closing, I called a family meeting of my own. Elaine, my sister-in-law Pauline, the cousins, the whole gallery that had spent a year absorbing the story of poor slipping Harriet and her bad stares. I made coffee cake. And I sat them down in my living room, with Walter's chair by the window where it belongs, and I took the green steno pad out of the kitchen drawer and I read them a year of it, dates and all. The measured dining room, the bank visit and the CD questions, the doctor with his sevens, the listing that went live while I toured Brookfield Commons. Nobody ate the coffee cake. Elaine cried and apologized for the potato salad afternoon, which she could not have known was a lie she was handed. I told her the pad was not for blame. The pad was so that in this family, from now on, the file is the truth. And the file says the stairs never happened. You should also know what happened to the people in this story because you have earned the accounting. Sandra Voss received a reprimand and a fine from the state commission, and her broker let her go quietly in the fall. Tiffany's license survived, barely, with a course in ethics she had to pay for herself. The kitchen with the pasta faucet remains a picture in a folder. The duplex went to other investors. Brookfield Commons sent me, and I am not making this up, a marketing letter in June addressed to me personally, hoping I would think of them for my future needs. I laughed alone in my kitchen for a good while. Then I did something that made Dale call me the dangerous one again. I drive to Brookfield every Tuesday now, not as a resident, as a volunteer. I raid to the memory care wing 2 chapters a week, and I play cards in the sunroom with a retired pharmacist named Gloria who cheats worse than Walter did, because here is what I refuse to let this story make me bitter about the wrong thing. That building full of old people was never my enemy. Some of them are the happiest people I know, and some of them chose that pond and that salon freely, with their own pens, and that is the entire difference. The room was never the crime. The pen in someone else's hand was the crime. Now, Glenn. I know it is Glenn you are wondering about because if you are a mother, he is the wound that will not sit still. For 2 months, nothing. Silence, which I let be because Dale advised it and because I did not trust my own phone voice yet. Then in June, a letter, handwritten, 4 pages, on legal pad paper, which broke me a little before I read a word because a man who emails for a living took out a pen. I will keep most of it, the way I kept most of Walter's, but I will tell you the 2 parts that mattered. He wrote that the night after the closing, he sat in his truck in our old church parking lot for 3 hours because it was the only place he could think of where neither Tiffany nor I had ever been disappointed in him. And that, he wrote, is where he finally opened his father's envelope, by the dome light, with the radio off. He did not tell me everything Walter said to him. He told me the last line: "Son, the measure of a man is not what he inherits. It is what he can be trusted alone in a room with." Glenn wrote that he sat with that sentence until the church lot lights went out, and he wrote this: "Mom, I keep telling people it got away from us, but I signed every page they put in front of me, and you are the one who taught me that your signature is the one thing nobody can get away from you. You hand it over. I handed it over. That is not a finished man, but it is a man facing the right direction." I wrote back 1 page. I told him repair is done in person, in small amounts over time, like interest. I told him Sunday dinner stands, first Sunday of every month, him and the kids. I did not include Tiffany, and I will not pretend that was an oversight, and he did not ask. Whatever is happening inside that marriage since the pasta faucet died is their ledger, not mine. We have had 5 of those dinners now. The first one was terrible. The second one was terrible. At the third one, Cody, my nodding Cody, looked up from his plate and said, "Grandma, is it true you bought your own house to catch Dad?" And I said more or less, and he said, "That is honestly kind of legendary," and went back to his chicken. 15-year-olds hand out absolution by accident. It was the hardest I had laughed since Walter died. And Katie. Katie graduated her sophomore year in May with a 3.8, and she came home for the summer, and she did not go to her parents' house. She asked if she could stay with me. She has Glenn's old room, the debate trophies moved down one shelf to make space for her things, and on Thursday nights we make her grandfather's chili from the index card, which travels back and forth between her suitcase and my recipe box like a little diplomat. She still does not know that I know what she overheard and told me and saved me. Someday, when the dust is 10 years deep, I will tell her what her phone call was worth. $835,000 for a start, and 1 house, and 1 grandmother, and the difference between a family that has a story and a family that has a secret. Some nights that summer, we sat on the porch, Katie and Ruth and I, with lemonade, and one night Katie asked me the question you may be asking. "Grandma, were you ever actually going to sell it to the trust if they had not caught on?" And I told her the truth. The sale was never going to close, sweetheart. A trust cannot really buy a house from a man who does not own it. The offer was a mirror. I just needed your father to walk all the way up to it, in his good suit, with witnesses, and see what was standing there. Some people can only recognize themselves at a closing table. It is where I have always done my best work. In September, I did something I had been putting off since the lemon drop morning. I drove out to Restlawn and visited Earl Hodges. Walter's card friend, the man whose split level started all of this before I knew anything had started. He is 4 rows from Walter, which the two of them would find hilarious. I stood at Earl's stone for a while, and I told him out loud, because the dead do not mind, that his house had not saved him, but it had saved me. Somebody's story always pays for somebody else's rescue. That is the economy nobody talks about. Then I walked the 4 rows and sat on the bench near Walter, and I gave him the full report, the way I used to give him the day over pot roast. The envelope opened. The deed held. The boy wrong, caught, and writing letters on legal pads. I told him about the wave and how I was still working on it. And I told him the thing I had figured out over the whole long year, which I will say to you now because it is the closest thing this story has to a moral. Walter did not save the house. People keep saying that to me at church, at the pharmacy. Harriet, thank God Walter thought ahead and saved the house. No, the house was never the thing. Walter looked at me, a woman everyone in that family had filed under sweet, and he built a structure where, when the day came, I would not have to beg anyone to believe me. No pleading my case at Thanksgiving, no convincing doctors, no hoping my son had mercy, just a recorded document with my name on it, sitting in a courthouse, being the truth. That is what love looks like when a builder does it. He did not leave me protected. He left me armed and trusted me to be enough, and I was. October came around again, the third October without him, and Dale and I met to review the trust, which we now do twice a year over sandwiches like it is a board meeting, because it is. The house stays in the trust for good. When I die, and I plan to be inconveniently slow about it, it goes 1/3 to Glenn and 2/3 split between Katie and Cody, held until they are 30. Glenn knows. I told him at a Sunday dinner, plainly, over the meatloaf. He put down his fork and said, "That is more than fair." And then he said, "Can I ask one thing?" And I braced, and he said, "Can Katie have the house itself if she wants it? She is the one who loves it like you do." And I looked at my son for a long moment, because that was the first sentence in 2 years that the boy who mowed Mrs. Pell's lawn had said with his whole chest. "Yes," I told him, "it is in the paperwork now." Dale added it in November, and we ate lemon drops over the signature page, and he told me Walter would be insufferable about how it all came out, and we laughed until his paralegal looked in on us. I want to close the file properly, the way I closed hundreds of them, with the loose ends accounted for. Ruth got a new porch light out of all this because I bought her one, the good motion sensor kind, and told her it was so she never misses another lockbox. She has taken the assignment seriously. No one parks on Alder Court unexamined. Denise at First Federal got zucchini bread again and does not know she was a hinge of history, and that is fine. Some soldiers never learn the name of the war. Donna Petrelli sent me a Christmas card with a title company joke inside so specialized that only she and I will ever find it funny. It is on the mantle. I framed it, actually, which tells you what my mantle has come to. The green steno pad filled up in December. All 40 years of habits do their arithmetic eventually, and I retired it to the cedar chest with the door handle and the envelope and the bracelet. The new pad is blue. First entry, December 9th. Bought new pad. Nothing to report. Longest sentence of my year, that one. Nothing to report. You have to have lived a certain kind of year to know what a palace of a sentence that is. I should tell you about Tiffany because you will notice she has gone missing from my happy endings, and I do not believe in hiding the unfinished parts of a file. I saw her in March at the grocery store in the baking aisle, a year, almost to the week, from the lockbox. We saw each other at the same moment, no exits, 2 carts, 12 feet of flour and vanilla between us. She looked older, not in the face exactly, in the posture. The heat lamp was off. And I watched her decide something, and she pushed her cart down those 12 feet and stopped in front of me and said, "Harriet, I am not going to pretend at you anymore." That is the most honest sentence she has ever said to me. She did not apologize. I want to be accurate because this is not that kind of story, and she is not that kind of woman, or is not yet. What she said was, "You were never confused a single day, were you?" And I said, "No." And she stood there holding a bag of brown sugar, and something moved across her face that I have decided to believe was respect, because at my age you are allowed to choose your interpretations. Then she said, "Glenn is different since the letter. You should know it is not an act." And she pushed her cart on toward the dairy case. That is the whole scene. No hug, no tears, no speech. Some accounts do not close. Some just stop accruing, and you learn to call that a kind of peace. Katie asked me at Easter if I hated her mother. I gave her the truest answer I own. I said, "Sweetheart, Hate is a full-time job with no pension, and I already gave 28 years to a better employer. What I feel for your mother is closer to what I feel for black ice. I do not hate it. I watch for it and I wear sensible shoes. Katie laughed so hard she had to put down her deviled egg. But you should also hear about the second Tuesday in May because it is the scene I did not expect my year to give me. At Brookfield, in the memory care wing, there is a resident named Mr. Albee, a retired surveyor, 91, who mostly does not speak. I had been reading to that room for months, 2 chapters a week, a Western, because the majority rules in the sunroom. And that Tuesday, in the middle of a chapter, Mr. Albee said, clear as a bell, my daughter sold my house. The whole room went still. The aide started toward him, and I put the book down and said, mine tried. And that old surveyor looked at me, all the way at me, present in a way the staff said he had not been in a year. And he said, did they get it? No, I said, they did not get it. He nodded once, slow, like a man checking a boundary line and finding the marker right where the plat said it would be. Good, he said. Then he was gone again, back behind the fog, and I picked the book back up and kept reading with a steady voice, which I promise you was a professional achievement. I sat in my car in the Brookfield parking lot for a while after that one, because that is who these buildings hold, you understand. Not just people who need help with stairs, rooms full of settled cases, and nobody left to reopen the files, and every so often a sentence surfaces out of the fog like a man waving from far past the breakers. My daughter sold my house. I could not save Mr. Albee's house any more than Walter could save Earl's. But I went home that afternoon and I sat at the kitchen table and I wrote the talk I had been declining to write for 2 months because Donna Petrelli had asked me to come speak to the new escrow officers at Cornerstone, and I had said, oh, who wants to hear from a retired woman? I gave that talk in June. 11 young people in a conference room, all of them faster than me on the software, none of them yet knowing what the job is. So I told them, the job is that some file on your desk, some ordinary Tuesday file, has a whole life inside it, and you are the last person standing between that life and a signature that should never happen. Read the chain. Every time, all the way down, even when the deal is clean and the agents are impatient and the cash is bright, you will catch nothing 400 times in a row. Then one morning, you will catch everything. A young man in the back asked how often a bad one had come across my own desk in 28 years. 9 times, I said, because I keep records. 9 houses that stayed with their rightful people because somebody read page 4. He wrote the number down like it was scripture. Donna says he has read every chain twice since and slowed her closings by a full day, and she could not be prouder. Before I let you go, sit with me one more minute because there are women listening to this in kitchens like mine. And I did not tell this whole story just to be admired for it. I told it because the machinery that came for my house is standard equipment, and it will run the same way in your family, with different names unless you jam it early. So here is what the escrow officer wants you to write down. First, know what you own and how you own it. Not roughly. Exactly. Go find your deed, read whose names are on it and how they are joined, because those little words, joint tenants, trustees, survivorship, are the whole ball game, and most people have never once read them. Second, be very careful what a power of attorney can reach and who is holding it. It is a fine tool and a terrible gift. If you signed one years ago in a hospital fog, as I did, go read it this week. Revoking one is a single piece of paper. I have never spent 20 minutes better. Third, if your family starts telling a story about you, a story where you are slipping, where you fell downstairs you never fell down, do not laugh it off. Correct the record every single time, calmly, in front of witnesses, and write down the date. The story comes first. The paperwork comes second. They cannot take what the story has not already loosened. Fourth, find your Dale before you need him. An attorney who knew you when you were sharp is worth double because he is a witness as much as a lawyer. And if you cannot afford one, your county has an office on aging with people whose entire job is this, and they have seen your exact situation 400 times. Fifth, and this is the one I mean most, do not perform weakness to keep the peace, and do not perform strength to keep your pride. Just keep records. Sweetness is not a strategy. Anger is not a strategy. The file is a strategy. And last, hear this clearly if you hear nothing else. Wanting to stay in your own home is not stubbornness. It is not denial, and it is not a burden you are placing on anyone. You are allowed to want your kitchen window and your own third stair sighing under your foot at night. Anyone who calls that unreasonable is telling you what your life is worth to them. Believe them the first time, and then act accordingly, quietly, with paperwork. If one sentence of that helps one woman keep one house, then Glenn's champagne bought something worthwhile after all. Tell me in the comments if this found you at the right time. I read them at night at the kitchen table with the blue pad handy in case anyone leaves a date worth writing down. And if you want these stories every week, you know where the buttons are. I am told the algorithm is like a family. It only remembers you if you keep showing up with something it wants. There is a last scene, and then I will let you go. It was 2 weeks ago, a Tuesday, because the important things in this story have all insisted on Tuesdays. I came home from Brookfield from Gloria and her marked cards, and Katie's car was in the driveway, and Glenn's truck was at the curb, unannounced. For one old cold second, my stomach did the arithmetic it learned last year. And then I came up the walk and heard it, laughing, from the backyard. Glenn was on a ladder cleaning my gutters, which nobody asked him to do. Cody was raking, mostly in the sense that a rake was near him. Katie had the chili going, I could smell it from the driveway, and Ruth was on my patio in the good chair, supervising everyone like a woman being paid for it. Glenn came down the ladder when he saw me. He had leaves in his hair, and he looked for a second exactly like a boy who mowed a sick neighbor's lawn all summer and never mentioned it to anyone. He said, "The gutters were full, Mom. I know a year and a half ago the gutters were an argument for selling the house, and now they were just gutters, and my son was cleaning them. And the difference between those two sentences is the whole story I have told you." I said, "Thank you, Glenn." He said, "First Sunday is in 3 days, but Katie was making chili, so. Families are rebuilt out of sentences that trail off like that. You do not get the speech mothers. You get, the gutters were full, and you learn to hear the whole apology inside it, the way you once heard the whole fever in a certain kind of cry. That evening, when they had gone and the dishes were done, I did two small things. I went to my phone, to the photograph Ruth sent me on the worst Tuesday, the lockbox on the brass handle. I had kept it all year. I looked at it one more time, and I did not delete it. I moved it into the folder with the pictures of Walter because it belongs to the same file now. Things that tried to end me and ended up in a drawer. Then I went to the front door and I turned my new brass lock, the one I chose, the one I paid for, the one whose only key lives on my ring and Katie's. It turned with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. And I stood in my front hall, in the house where I washed a dying man's hair and raised a boy, and caught that same boy and forgave him in installments. And I listened. The furnace hummed. The third stair said nothing, because no one was on it. 4,000 nights I have locked that door, give or take, and I expect a few thousand more, and here is what I know at 74 that I did not know at 72. They told me this house was too much for me. They had it exactly backward. I was always going to be too much for anyone who came for this house. Good night from Alder Court. The porch light is on, the deed is where it belongs, and the seller, I am delighted to report, is no longer motivated.